Hello and welcome to the Sky Sports F1 podcast, sponsored by Dropbox. I'm Matt Baker, and joining me this week, one of the most recognisable voices in F1 broadcasting, a man with 158 Grand Prix starts, 10 podiums, a World Sports Car champion, a Le Mans and Daytona winner, Sky Sports F1's very own Martin Brundle. How are you, Martin?
I'm really good, Matt. Thank you. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. Perhaps a good place to start is, of all those achievements I've just listed there, which ones are you most proud of, the broadcasting or the racing?
Well, that's a very good question to start with. I still think of myself as a racing driver who does a bit of TV, and I think I always will. I started racing when I was 12, and I still drive cars to this day and race when I can with my son in some historics. So I would have to say the racing, and the pinnacle's Formula One. So whilst I didn't achieve what I could have and should have achieved in F1, they were the races that I most enjoyed, being on the podium at Silverstone or Monza with Schumacher and Senna or something like that. The Le Mans victory, you're part of a big team. You're always part of a team whenever you win in a racing car, but that was pretty special, I must say, for Jaguar in front of a huge crowd at the end of what is a very challenging race. So they're all special, they're all wonderful, but it's the F1 that counts best.
Yeah. For the purposes of this podcast, we're going to focus on your broadcasting career, which is kind of where we're going to pick up from. I'm really excited about this. I've wanted to do a piece on the Gridwalk and your broadcasting career for a while. I want to go back to 1997. This is the year that you join ITV as a commentator. Where do we find you at the beginning of that year? Were you still hoping to be racing that year? How did the opportunity come along for broadcasting?
Well, it first started actually when I was a Brabham driver when Murray was working with James Hunt, and they couldn't find James at Spa one day. So it was either going to be 89 or 91, I can't remember which. And anybody who could speak English who broke down in the race was dragged up to the commentary box to help Murray out. And I did that. And I remember my manager at the time saying to me, "Why did you go?" I said, "I wanted to beat the traffic out of there. It's horrendous." And I was long out of the race, sort of thing. And then in 1995, I was sharing a car, the Ligier, with Aguri Suzuki, which is, you can't imagine it today, can you? But we literally took it in turns to drive the car because it was complicated, but I won't bore you with the details on that. And so on the race weekends where I was attending but not driving, I would be with Eurosport on Saturday and then with BBC on Sunday to do commentary as third person. So I sort of had a bit of a lead in, really. But I was a very reluctant commentator in 1997 because I wanted to be in Formula One. I wanted to be driving. So I was kind of kicking and screaming and shouting. And I remember standing in the comm box in Melbourne with the wonderful Murray Walker. And the cars were coming to the grid. And I felt a sense of panic because I felt they were going without me. And I wasn't ready. You can't start the race yet. I'm not ready. But I soon got over that. And here we are, 27, 28 years, seasons later, still doing it.
It must have been tough in that sense, because I guess it did signal the end of your probably Formula One racing career. Is that fair, in 97, when you have to go and start thinking about a career after racing, which obviously can't go on forever? As an elite sports person, that must be quite a difficult period.
It was. So I took on a number of roles to try to use my energy and the adrenaline and the determination that I had. And yes, F1 was over. And Eddie Jordan had replaced me with Giancarlo Fisichella and Ralph Schumacher. And you know what? It was right. It was the right thing to do. They were young and they were fast. And I was sort of towards the end of my shelf life. So it was good timing in some respects. So I took on a newspaper column. I started managing David Coulthard. I was driving at Le Mans for the Works Nissan team, and then I went on to Toyota and Bentley at Le Mans. So I think I was 41 when I finished, being paid to be a professional driver, as it were. And then I also became involved at Arrows Formula One team with Tom Walkinshaw. So I had like 5 jobs, basically. Was the only way I could. I was sort of floundering. What am I going to do now? So, and that's what I did for the next few years, and no regrets at all.
We're quite used to seeing, I think, now in the sports broadcasting landscape, Gary Neville, Jamie Carragher, Nico Rosberg on our team, people who finish their sport and then go straight into broadcasting and turn out to be excellent broadcasters. Just give us the media landscape back in 1997. Was it common for ex-sports people to go into the media world?
I guess so, with the football pundits and that. I never really thought about it, to be honest, because I as I said, I don't really think of myself as a broadcaster. I'm a Formula One person after 40 odd years experience who tells people about it. And I grew up selling cars. So I learned how to communicate doing that. Actually, I think I sold my first car when I was 8 at my dad's garages. And
wow.
I just enjoyed, because I loved it so much, and I still love it a great deal today, I enjoyed informing people. And a piece of advice Murray Walker gave me on the eve of the first race was, just remember, we're only here to inform and entertain, nothing else. And I live by that mantra today, because it was absolutely right. So I think if people have given up their spare time or hard-earned cash to sit alongside a racetrack or to be online or in front of the TV or whatever, they want to know more about what they're watching. It's a fast-moving, highly complex sport. So I really enjoyed taking people on the journey, trying to... My job as the sort of co-commentator, expert witness, if you like, is to put people in the car, on the grid, on the pit wall, in the pit lane, and transport them on the journey that they're watching. And that's what I enjoy doing.
So that's the mantra you've ended up broadcasting by. I wonder, for those first few races, how did you find that approach into television? Was it something you took to like a duck to water, or did you go, oh my goodness me, hold on a minute, why are there people talking in my ear? What's going on here? How was it for you?
I didn't have a problem with that, because I used to fly planes and helicopters, so having people, working out who was talking to you and who was just talking to somebody else wasn't a problem. I'd obviously had radio communication in Le Mans cars and Formula One cars. So, no, I didn't. It's still a mystery to me how it gets on air. I have no idea, and I have no interest in it, because it's not my skill set. I don't need to know how we go from a patch of concrete in the paddock in Shanghai to everybody's front room. That's for other people to worry about. I just need to tell the story. And honestly, I've never taken, except for the year when I was lead commentator in my last year at BBC before I came to Sky, I've never taken a note into a commentary box. So I feel if I see stuff on track, I've either seen it before or it's happened to me, or I've just got a feel for what's going on. And that's all I need, really. And I've done the same thing ever since I started. I haven't really put any more thought into that. I got some nice reviews at early doors. I thought, okay, people seem to quite like this. And I've watched pretty much nothing back ever.
That's extraordinary.
And people will let you know. You soon know if people do or don't like what you're saying, what you're doing. Because I use the analogy. You get invited if they're watching it on TV or maybe on some kind of device in their front room, their lounge, call it what you like, sitting room. Very few people go in there. Their closest friends and their closest relatives go in that room, and you're invited into the corner on a set. And if people don't like you, or you're not informing them, or you're not adding value, they can get rid of you with one little button. And that's my mantra, basically. Make sure you're adding some value to this.
This was, of course, before social media, and now it's a lot easier, isn't it, for people to let you know what they think of you quite quickly. But I imagine, a nice period, was it, before social media?
Yeah, it was, but yes, people are generally quite nice. Social media gets a little bit nasty, as we all know, but it's people I meet on the tube, on the Victoria line in London, or in an airport, or at a racetrack or in a hotel or whatever near a race, who come up to you, and they're the people that I value. And also, sometimes I go and talk to a couple of thousand people in a campsite at Spa, and they're in a tent in a muddy field, and then they walk over a hill with their beer and their sandwiches and all that sort of thing for the day. And I really like talking to those people, because I think they're true fans. They've invested their own time and their own hard-earned tax-paid cash to be there to support Formula One. And I think you get a really true feedback from those people. So they are my references rather than maybe social media.
Yeah, certainly. So the opening part of your career, your co-commentator, but the lead commentator was Murray Walker. It'd be great to get your memories of working with Murray, one of the great broadcasters in any sport, let alone Formula One. How was that learning from someone like him?
Well, I knew Murray very well because even from Formula 3 days, he'd turn up on his motorbike when there was not a Formula 1 race on that weekend and just watch us in F3, me and Senna, something like that. And then when I got into Formula 1 as a driver, I spent time with Murray, he'd go and have dinner. So I considered him a good friend. And of course, we all respected him enormously. The smartest decision I ever made in my working life was to stand up and talk to him, because he always stood up, because he said it opened his diaphragm, and Murray liked. There was a lot of breath coming out of Murray when he was going for it, and I did that. So I worked on his level and talked to him, And as far as I was concerned, there were two people talking about Formula One. The fact there were many millions or tens of millions listening was neither here nor there. We in some respect, we just talked about Formula One. And of course, he was so effusive about everything. And I often used to joke with him that I think with half an hour to go of an exciting race, I could have walked out the back of the commentary box and gone home. He wouldn't have noticed until after the race was over.
He was that involved.
He got so excited. So we had this sort of, we're standing side by side. We had this sort of deal that I suggested. So if I wanted to say something, I put my hand on his right shoulder. I always stood to the right, and he would give me the mic, defer to me. Didn't always happen. So eventually, if I could get a fingernail underneath a tendon and push really hard, he might notice that I actually want to have something to say. But Murray was brilliant. He was people loved him, and they still love him today. Bless him, although he's long gone now. I read just this morning he would have been 101 today. Actually.
Wow.
On the wonderful social media, actually, funny enough. So, he was great. I learned, I often say, learning how to talk about Formula One and broadcast Formula One from Murray Walker's like having Pele teach you how to kick a ball. And that's how I was always respectful. I had to correct him from time to time because he would make the occasional blunder, which Murray lived off, let's be honest.
Murray is
brilliant.
As they're known, yeah.
And I would have to gently sort of correct him on a few things. So, but I think people came on that journey with me as well, but because they knew there was the ultimate respect, and we got on very well, really well.
Do you have any favourite Murrayisms? The ones that I was just looking through on YouTube a few today, I'm going to start the stopwatch, stuff like that, which was just amazing. It's such a fast-moving sport, isn't it? It's inevitable you're going to make some mistakes or trip over the words a bit, but that kind of was the charm. Is that fair? Yeah, I think so. And then he was smart enough to literally trade off making mistakes, wasn't he? Who else can get away with that in the world of broadcasting? Be famous and loved for making errors. I mean, it's genius, isn't it? But he had such a personality. We all know the Murrayisms. I think it's that the energy when he would be slightly stooped over and something would be happening on the screen, and he was so excited. And so engaged in that. That's probably what I'll remember most. In those mid-90s broadcasts, what were you looking at as a commentary box? Obviously, we'll come on to talk about the modern commentary box, but I'm just intrigued. How much data, how much information did you have in front of you? Well, we had a lot less, but then everybody had a lot less. Because now, when I'm not attending Grand Prix, I sit and watch it all weekend with my devices out and all the sector times and what have you and speeds. So, I mean, there's radio, which is where you've really got to paint the picture. Obviously, I've never done that. With TV, you've got the picture. You've got there were less camera angles. There was a lot less data, and and stats. Hardly any stats around really back in those days. So, but it didn't seem to matter. We had some big characters driving the cars, and the racing was pretty good, but it wasn't anywhere near as good as today because I think people have got
rose-tinted glasses of like, racing used to be so much better. It wasn't. It was just so much more unreliable, and cars crashed more because they were much more difficult just to keep on the racetrack. Something, the amount of, when I was driving, you could be on the podium 2 laps behind. We'd laugh today if that happened. If you're 20 seconds behind, you're a long way behind these days. So, there were some pretty steady old races. Remember, not only did we know many of those years which team was going to win, we knew which driver, i.e. Michael Schumacher in a Ferrari. And then, of course, we had to fit 5 advertising breaks into a fast-moving sport. And I can only remember, actually, in all the years we did at ITV, 4 or 5 ads that were really lumpy. Somehow or other, we sort of magicked them in. Then they added a minute to them later on in that ITV phase. And that it was Imola when it was Schumi and Alonso fighting hard. That was the one we got horribly wrong. But generally, I think we sort of eased them in and out. But so Murray and I would have to talk for the rest of the world, as it was known as, whoever was taking our feed. We didn't know. I'm not even sure I know today who takes our feed, but in totality, I mean. But and then we'd have to pick back up. And of course, if something had happened in an ad break, we had to play it back in. And so we used to sort of tread water. But there are times when Murray and I looked at each other and like, what are we going to say now? There's nothing happening. So some of those races were pretty tedious, I must say.
Before we continue the podcast, a quick word from our sponsors, Dropbox, because we all know that victories in F1 can be won or lost by the finest of margins, and it's the reason that data plays such a crucial role in a team's success. In fact, over a race weekend, 1.5 terabytes of data is collected per team. That's a lot of data. As a technology partner of the McLaren Formula One team, Dropbox is trusted for its fast, secure and reliable syncing and sharing capabilities, which helps the team quickly search and manage this huge amount of content and data. If you would like to find out more, you can get an exclusive behind-the-scenes look at how Dropbox fuels the McLaren Formula One team's speed and performance by visiting dropbox.com/McLaren F1. And of course, a big thank you to Dropbox for sponsoring this podcast. Okay, let's talk Gridwalk. Something you've become very famous for. It's got a cult status. Let's go back to the beginning. Your first grid walk. Who had the crazy idea to send you with a microphone and a camera down a grid in Formula One?
It would be Neil Duncanson, Gerard Lane at North One, who ran the ITV F1 programme. They said, I'm not a creative person. I'm a detail person. I'm facts. I'm a knowledge-based person. I'm not really creative at all. And that's true today. And that's why I love doing Formula One TV, because here at Sky, because we've got so many young, creative, like your good self, coming through.
We try.
Coming through and, coming up with ideas and challenging you and keeping you a bit younger in mind. And so they said, why don't you walk down the grid and just say what you see? All right, then I'll give that a go. And literally, I was the only person on the grid with one camera. And I remember sitting down and saying, this is the driver's eye view when they come to the grid, because with the camera over my shoulder, because you sit on the floor of a Formula One car. And it just grew from there, really. It was so easy back in those days. So easy, because there was nobody else to compete with. Drivers would stop by and have a good old chat. I remember talking once to Michael Schumacher and Gerhard Berger at the same time, and could do what I wanted and go where I wanted to. The grid was deserted, generally speaking, back then. So, and it kind of just grew, and then funny things happened, not intentionally. I'm not a comedian. I'm absolutely not a stand-up comedian. And I'm massively out of my comfort zone doing it, which is why I've never watched one, is running around being cheeky and interrupting people is so not me. So not me. But it's sort of taken on a life of its own. It annoys me a bit, to be honest, because as you introduce it as you become very famous for, I'd rather be well known and appreciated for calling a race, calling some good races, being a sports commentator, rather than being kicked about or by a security guard or ignored by somebody. But you're right, it has taken on a life of its own, and it's sort of grown over the years. But then, the grid now has it looks like it's got 2,000 people on it from what I can work out.
What are the ingredients then of a good grid walk? What if you were to set up your dream grid walk? Who are the people maybe, and what would have to happen for you to go, that was a good one?
Well, the only feedback I get back is when I've come up with a bit of a one-liner, or I've literally been told to go away by somebody. So that's not my idea of a dream grid walk. A good grid walk adds a little bit of important information about the day, the race, the cars, or one of the drivers in particular, and talk to a celeb or two. Must talk to some drivers. I'm really disappointed if I don't get to see some drivers, which is getting near impossible actually to find a driver on the grid,
because they go to their garage. They don't want to be bothered, I guess. No, but
a lot of them, Lewis and George, go back to the stations in the garage and do a debrief. I mean, that, on headphones, and a lot of the drivers do. They get off the grid if it's hot, especially. They need to go and drink. They need to go to the bathroom. And they don't want to be bothered on the grid. You're right. So, but I like to talk to some drivers, a few celebs, a few key people in Formula One. Whenever you see me doing an MRP, as I call it, a Marty's Random Person, I'm in trouble. I don't know who I'm going to talk to next, because it's sort of tests me, to be honest, because I've got 3 different people talking to me, and I'm trying to work out what I'm going to do next, whilst asking sometimes massive A-listers a question. Golden rule number 1, you must listen to the answer, because you've got to pick up if they say something really interesting. So I'm kind of trying to listen. I'm listening in here, and I'm having a little look around, wondering what I'm going to do next. And I like that. That's the only thing that really makes me nervous. I miss I think sports people in general, but racing drivers perhaps in particular, I don't know. We're adrenaline junkies. We're so used to that adrenaline of getting in a car, starting a race, jumping in for a qualifying lap, whatever. So the only thing that replaces that a bit is the grid walk. When they go Q Martin, and I know I've got 12 to 14 minutes of unrehearsed, unscripted, live car crash television, I'm a bit nervous, to be honest. and I like that feeling.
I guess that's a different nerve or different form of nervousness, doing a grid walk to a commentary, because the commentary, you're going to have the pictures, you're going to have a race in front of you to commentate on, but is the grid walk really is just you and whatever you choose to do in that 12 to 14 minutes?
It is. And we put little to no planning into it. It might get mentioned on a Sunday morning, what we're going to do about the grid walk then.
Yeah.
Somewhere, I think Miami, we had a list of 60 odd celebs going on the grid. Vegas, it was 72. So we're feverishly trying to work out who these people are, what they look. They never look in their normal civvies on the grid, in their sunnies and a cap or whatever, how they do online. Florence Pugh, who was absolutely lovely. I talked to her at the British Grand Prix 2023. I'd Googled her, and I'm usually doing this during our pre-show, and trying to Google these people I'd like to talk to. And when we found her on the grid, she had short pink hair, which she did not have online. So actually getting the wrong person is highly possible.
Give us some of the highlights of your grid walk then over your Formula One career. Who are the people that you've had that you go, yeah, I've really enjoyed that, or that was a really interesting, good conversation?
So I would always start with the drivers in that respect. Talking to Michael Schumacher, Kimi Räikkönen. We had an amusing event in Brazil once, but perhaps the peak for me was front of the grid, Suzuka. Mika Häkkinen is on pole, got a chance to win the World Championship, and he's just putting his balaclava on as I get there, and he looks at me as much say, we were teammates at McLaren, obviously know each other well, still very much do, and he looked at me as much say, you know better than come on, Martin. So I just said to him, Mika, can you win the World Championship today? Yes, I can. Down goes the balaclava, on goes the helmet, gets in the car, wins the World Championship. And for me, that is unique broadcasting opportunity, content, whatever you like to call it, because which other sport can you do that in, where you can talk to the participants seconds before they're about to do what they do? And that's what I love most, actually. Or just spotting something, or just a little something. In terms of the celebs, Kylie Minogue's always one of my favourites. I said Florence Pugh was lovely. And just endless, lovely people, actually, who are enjoying it. I know a lot of the fans, some of the fans, I should say, get angry because they think they're real Formula One fans. They should be on the grid and not celebs who don't really care and just milking it for themselves. But there is an element of that. Some people come along just to be seen and don't. You can tell they're not really into it. I would say half the people on the list we get through either don't turn up to the event, and if they do, they don't make it onto the grid. So that throws us a few curveballs. Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones, they're always lovely and gracious to me. So I just love meeting people. And it's a great privilege to meet the actors and sports folk and all that, isn't it? It's a wonderful privilege to meet them, pop stars, what have you. Stormzy's always great. Mm-hmm. I could go on and on, actually. Ozzy Osbourne, he was hilarious in Canada one year. And it goes on. But, of course, the only thing that goes viral on a thing called TikTok, which I've never been on, which amuses me really, that this stuff's all is literally when it goes wrong, isn't it? When I get knocked about or something, but whatever.
It was hugely enjoyable, I must say, going through YouTube and looking at all of the old ITV ones, the Ozzy Osbourne one. There's a compilation of you and Jenson. You used to give each other a little.
The nipple tweet.
Yeah, the little nipple tweet.
That's where that came from.
If you've got time, YouTube is a fantastic place for all of this content because it's very, very good. You could fall into a real hole. What about how the Gridwalk has changed since 97 to today? You mentioned there the influx of celebrities on the grid. And can you remember a point where you were on the grid and you went, oh, yeah, hold on a minute. There's a lot of people on here now, and this is full of celebs. Yeah,
I think so. Formula One's massive at the moment, bigger than I've ever seen it. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. In the pandemic, we put on 32 Grand Prix when most other sports weren't happening. That was an incredible effort by everyone, by Formula One itself, the FIA, all the teams and media. I think, what do we have, 150 or 200 of those tests up our noses to get around the world to cover Formula One then. So Formula One was out there when pretty much no other sport was. Drive to Survive has been massive. The biggest step change I've seen is on Drive to Survive in terms of energising a younger audience, a more diverse audience. It's been absolutely brilliant. The grid look like a massive boy band, don't they? They're good-looking kids. They're media savvy. They're just nice kids. They are really nice kids. And the racing has been really good. And I think that has brought a lot more celebrities onto the grid. So that's what's changed the grid itself, if you like, the sort of landscape. Bernie Ecclestone, who, none of us would be in Formula One if it wasn't for Bernie, gluing it all together over those decades. But he wouldn't let anybody on the grid, hardly. Liberty Media have really opened up the grid to a point where it's almost impossible to get around now. But and they've energised that. There's no doubt about it. People want to be seen on the Formula One grid. There was a time where we could have gone a whole season without seeing a decent A-lister, if you like. So I think there's any number of elements that have made Formula One huge like it is now, especially in America.
It is bizarre, isn't it, when you think about it? These mechanics and engineers and drivers are about to prepare a car to do all those laps for Grand Prix, and then you've got all these people just trying to get photos or invade the space. So I was thinking, if you're a surgeon and you're about to do surgery on someone, the last thing you would want is all these distractions, and yet these people have to deal with all this stuff around them. But the energy that is created on a Formula One grid with the music blaring, it's not great for us as broadcasters, is it?
Yeah.
But it is such a great energy to be on a Formula One grid.
It is. It's the calm before the storm as well, isn't it? But then there's laptops everywhere. There's heaters for this bit, coolers for that bit, dry ice everywhere. And the mechanics are actually quite calm because they've done their job. And I used to be really calm on the grid because I felt, right, I've qualified the best I can. Now I'm going to go racing. That's the bit I really love. That's the bit I'm good at. And I used to feel quite calm in that space as well. But yeah, I think it's a huge privilege to be on a Formula One grid.
Certainly.
And I still, I've done, 600 races or something, and I first stood in the, at Copse Corner in the 60s when I went with my uncle 60 years ago. So I feel very lucky to still be on the grid, absorbing all of that. And I often think, if it was Wimbledon, you couldn't go to Roger Federer and go, Roger, just before you serve that ball, how's the grass today? How are you feeling? Do you think you can win this? Or Beckham in the centre circle at Wembley, you couldn't say, David, whoa, stop. Right, just before you kick that ball, we get this access that's unique. And I know some of our Sky F1 colleagues, when they come in from other sports, they're blown away by the access that we get, and I think that's lovely, and I think our fans hopefully appreciate that.
I'm sure they do. Let's move on to talk a bit more in detail about commentary. So you leave the grid, and firstly, I'd like to know how you get to your commentary box. I imagine some tracks are easier than others to get to the commentary box, which is not always by the side of the grid. What are you doing? I mean, you mentioned earlier you don't bring any notes to the commentary box. So what are you doing to prepare for a race, if anything? Sunday
morning, we go to some briefings, Crofty and I, and get that sort of last minute knowledge. And teams are quite open at that point because not a lot's going to change. They're not going to give you their race strategy, but they give you a lot of information. We just read all weekend. I go out on track on a Friday, so I get a lot of knowledge from that. I talk relentlessly to people. I've got my touchstones in the paddock where we trade information, 3 or 4 people. If something big's going up, I will go and talk to Zach, Christian, Toto, go and talk to somebody, and they won't tell me lies. If they can't tell me, they won't tell me, or they'll tell me something. I would say 60 or 70% of what I know I could never say on the TV. But that does give me the other 30%. And then it also means that it gives me a guidance, or I can give my Sky F1 colleagues a guidance on if we're heading off in the wrong direction or something. It's probably too much, 60 or 70%, but there's a lot of stuff you get to know and people tell you in great confidence. So you can't breach that confidence, otherwise you'll never get the other bit down the road. So we are in a sanctum. We get caught in the crossfire. The most unpleasant time I've known in all these years of commentating was Abu Dhabi 2021 in general, because it became so feisty, so aggressive between Mercedes and Red Bull. And Sky kind of got caught up in the middle of that. We got caught in the crossfire, basically. And each team pretty much felt if you weren't with them, you had to be against them. And they both felt that. And it was really uncomfortable, actually, that whole phase. But friendships remained, and we all moved on. So we just gather knowledge and then try and share it.
What then for you is important in a good commentary? Again, what do you look for, and what makes you go, yeah, I did a good job there? That I feel like I nailed that race.
So we have to, how teams have got a group of people on the pit wall in the garage and then back at base doing the strategy, looking at their 2 cars and trying to work out what their main rivals are doing. We try to do that for all 10 teams without all the data. So if we've called the strategy well and I go, McLaren have to cover that now, and I think they've stayed out too long or something, and it turns out to be right, I feel quite good about that, because it's hard trying to think about the strategies for all of them. We don't, and how it'll play out. Not that I want to big myself up on that, but I feel we've told the real story as we've gone along. I do think the worst case scenario is if somebody's running 9th that ends up on the podium and you haven't flagged it up. You know, you haven't telegraphed that watch out for this, watch out for Charlie Hummingtop. You know, he's 9th at the moment, but his pace and he's not got to stop again and all that. That would be and it's never happened. It'd be my ultimate nightmare that somebody pops up and like, oh, he's on the podium, is he? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I guess that's part of the challenge of Formula One, isn't it? Because we don't actually at Sky control the pictures that we get. So obviously, F1 do a phenomenal job of giving us pictures for the race, but you are in charge of telling that story, aren't you? And obviously, we, as a British broadcaster, we try to tell the story of British drivers just with perhaps a bit more detail. Is that fair?
I don't know whether we. No, I don't think we do. Yeah. I don't think there's any. I mean, I'm a Brit. I'm a former British Formula One driver, and we're broadcasting primarily to a British broadcaster. Others take our feed all the way around the world. So, we're nothing like when I watch the Olympics or the World Cup or the European Cup. Obviously, your commentators are fervently pro whichever country they're from. And commentator, I don't think we do that. I like to think we're pretty balanced. I really do. And actually, we get flack from pretty much everybody. Because what I have learned in these 27, 28 years is that you can say 1,000 positive things about somebody, 10,000. One negative will get back to them and their fans get onto it, or their family and friends tell them, and they get a little bit. I get a few cool sideways glances sometimes. Nobody ever comes up to you and says, thank you very much for what you said about us at the week. I did have it once, actually. It was Nico Rosberg. And he came up to me in Malaysia a million years ago, said, I'd like to thank you for what you said about me last weekend. I said, oh, okay. I really appreciate that, because I've got to be honest with you, you're the first driver that's ever said anything to me like that. And by the way, the last. And blah, blah, blah. I said, if you don't mind, what did I say that you liked? Just for my reference. He said, I don't know, my mum told me I needed to thank you. So actually, I still hadn't been thanked by a driver for something nice. And I respect them so much. I've just jumped out of a very recent hybrid car this week, and my respect for the drivers is even higher than it was before, if that's possible. So something we'll be covering later in the year on Sky F1. But I have the utmost respect. I know how hard it is to get to Formula One. It's even harder to stay there. So my fundamental position is respect, and they're doing a great job. Of course, you can't just keep, if somebody's made a mistake or it's somebody's error, on the spot, you have to call, they've gone off into the wall together. Whose fault was it? Or should a driver have done this or that in qualifying? Has he missed an apex? Has he hit a curb too hard or whatever? You've got to say that. So, yeah, the negatives get picked up. The positives don't. So that's an interesting one. But I tell you, a commentary I loved doing was the brilliant Brazilian Grand Prix 2008, where Felipe Massa looked like he was the world champion, but I was watching sector by sector Lewis and Timo Glock, and I had that one covered, and I was pretty proud of that one because that was an easy one to get wrong. So they're the moments where you got to get it, where you got to make the right call. You don't always get it right. You make mistakes. Of course you make mistakes. And the worst thing in the world to do is then, in front of tens of millions of people, start trying to justify yourself. You've made a mistake. Shut up and move on.
Hands up. Yeah. Sorry, guys, was wrong. Yeah. What a refreshing attitude to have. I was going to say, it's a very nuanced sport as well, isn't it? It's so complicated that having all these different elements, we need someone like yourself, like the experienced pundits that we have to break it down for us. Let's move on, if we can, to interviewing, which is another big part of your job. You've got Gridwalk, you've got your commentary as a broadcaster, but interviewing, you've probably interviewed, I think it's fair to say, everyone worth interviewing in Formula One. So I'd like to get your thoughts on what they're like to interview. Let's perhaps start with some world champions. Lewis Hamilton, first of all. When did you first meet Lewis, and how have you enjoyed watching his career progress and obviously be the 7-time world champion that he is today?
I handed Lewis a trophy to Buckmore Park when he was 12 or 13 years old. Was the first time I met him. And I remember he was a instructor at Palmer Sport. He took us around in some caterhams one day when he was younger. And I would first have met him to chat to him when he was a McLaren protege, and when he got up into F2 especially, I'd see him in the McLaren motorhome. So, he's, these, particularly Lewis, he's a megastar. He's transcended the sport. Everybody wants to talk to all of these megastars in Formula One, especially these days. So they're generally a bit reluctant. They've got so many demands on their time now with sponsors and media and what have you. So if you're going to sit down and talk to them, there's no point. There's no flim-flam. Just get on with it. They know you've done it yourself, not to the level they have. And again, another thing I learned from Murray is it's never about you. Leave your ego out of the commentary box, leave your ego out of all these interviews, because it's just about them and the subject of the day. Yeah, you're not going to hit them hard right between the eyes, but you've got to be journalistic. You've got to ask the tough questions. And that's sometimes very hard to do. Sometimes I'd like to be more journalistic than I am. But I need to talk to these guys on the grid. I travel near them on an aeroplane. I see them here, there and everywhere. They're friends, some of them. So it's quite a balancing act, actually. But they're all the drivers are intelligent and ready to have an intelligent conversation. I find it pretty easy to talk to them, to be honest. I mean, if one of them's kind of on the way out, they were a star, they were a champion, but it's sort of the end of the day is that I wouldn't say I look forward to those interviews.
Very interesting. I mean, you mentioned it there. Do you think the fact that you've been there and done it from a era where it was more dangerous than it is now in Formula One, do you think that those drivers currently have a larger respect for you? And when you ask them a question, they know that you've been there, they know that you've done it?
I don't know if they have any respect for me whatsoever. Honestly, I don't. You'll have to ask them. Yeah. I don't know. I think there's no doubt about it. It helps when they know you've been there, done it, crashed the car.
What about then interviewing Michael Schumacher, a former teammate, and you then go in to become a broadcaster? How did you find that transition? And what, if you could recount any times you interviewed him where he went,
Well, weirdly, we fell out because something I said was taken out of context and translated into German and put in a headline in a newspaper. And Michael got very upset. I have no idea what it was to this day. And he wouldn't speak to me for 5 years. It was really odd. And then we got drunk together in a nightclub in Valencia when he was on his sabbatical between Mercedes and Ferrari. And we were fine after that. He was sort of hanging off my shoulder, like my teammate. And we sort of, it broke the ice again. So I really don't know what the problem was, but that was a real shame. But yeah, generally, I think you have to, there are some drivers, and many drivers do it. And I find it interesting to see Nico coming over, or DC, Mark Webber. I'm thinking they're coming out of the paddock, usually with the other side of the track, in a bit dingy, the TV compounds, empty coffee cups everywhere, which I go around and clear up because I'm a bit of a neat freak. But I think how are they going to cope with that? Damon's another one, but they all cope with it absolutely fine.
Yeah,
because they're just real people at the end of the day. They might be megastars when they're in a racing car, but they're just real people, and they come over and they engage and they just get stuck in. And we run a pretty tight ship, don't we, with our meetings and the way we go about it and the structure to what we do. So it impresses me. And I don't think it matters whether you're in TV or whether you're still driving or whatever. It's just a human level. Have you got some interesting questions, some pertinent questions or not?
We've got a situation now, haven't we, with social media where the likes of, say, Lando Norris can have his own YouTube channel, his own Instagram account. He can broadcast his own story in his words and make it completely authentically him. He doesn't, in a sense, do you think he still needs the likes of linear broadcasters like Sky to have a platform to be able to speak to a wider audience?
But that's up to the audience, 100%. So, of course, if a team or a driver's putting stuff out, it's all going to be very positive and very angled towards them or their sponsors or whatever. There's no journalistic element to that. There's no asking the real questions that need asking. So maybe there's room for both. There appears to be room for both, doesn't there? But it's a different offering completely. But if a driver's prepared to take you can live your life to an extent vicariously through what they're doing, then great. If that's what people want, we're going to come at it in a different way.
Final question on interviewing: who have been your favourite people to speak to from the driver's perspective? I
like Max. Talking to Max, I find him very grounded and very straightforward. I like them all, to be honest. I got so much respect for them. Seb, good. All of them. They're all good people, and they're bright people. I don't think I've got a single driver that I haven't enjoyed engaging with.
Very good answer, very diplomatic answer as well.
It's true.
It's very good. Just look, final few questions while we've got you. We've spoken kind of about how Formula One has changed, about how your broadcasting career has changed since 1997. When you look at the future of Formula One, are you excited by what's coming? Where do you see the positives and perhaps the dangers for Formula One over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, we're on the crest of a wave. I don't know how long we can ride that for, but it's just sensational at the moment. Everybody wants a piece of Formula One, and everybody seems to be interested in it. And Netflix, it doesn't do anything for me. I've watched a little bit of it, but it's not aimed at me at all. But it's reduced the average age of a Formula One audience by 10 years and increased the female participation in the audience to 37%, I believe. That is incredible. Any sport in the world would love that. And we're on a roll. Everybody wants a Grand Prix. Countries want a Grand Prix. Everyone wants to be at a Grand Prix. And if we can keep that going for a while, but you've got to be entertaining. At the end of the day, people don't want to, we've sort of weathered Mercedes winning everything and then Red Bull winning everything. As long as there's some decent racing, nobody wants to sit and watch a sport where the result before it even begins. So we've got to be competitive. We've got to, but it's fast. It's still a bit scary. We still have some big old crashes, and it's a fascinating high finance world. Everything about it. So we've got to keep that going. I'm concerned about the 2026 cars, but not overly, because usually we get all this noise and then it'll be all right on the night. It's a shame because it will scatter the pack again for 2026. 2025, I think, will be an all-time classic season in Formula One. It's going to be so close. Everything's converging, as we're seeing already in this season as well, aren't we, of course, with 7 different winners this year. So it's a pity we've got to do that.
Why are we?
It's to keep the manufacturers engaged, although that hasn't really happened because Alpine's gone. Honda have stayed. I don't know whether they would have stayed or not. Audi are coming in, Ford, but that's very much a Red Bull project, really. Has it really engaged a lot more manufacturers? No. We've got to stay relevant. This is a huge problem for Formula One. You've got to be cutting edge. We've always been cutting edge of technology. You've got to stay relevant. You can't become a dinosaur. But at the same time, we'd all love V8s and V10s and petrol engines back, but then we wouldn't have the manufacturers and the sponsors, and we wouldn't be anywhere near as grand as we are. So it's a very, very difficult line to walk for Formula One. Let's hope we got it right for 2026.
Let's hope so. Martin, thank you so much for coming on. A really, really fascinating chat. And I think I speak for all of Sky Sports F1 viewers when I say we look forward to many more Gridwalks, many more commentaries for years to come.
Commentary's great. Gridwalks, you can have them.
Thanks, Martin.